مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. من بين كل القضايا المطروحة في مضمار السياسة الأميركية لا توجد قضية تضاهي في تعقيدها وإثارتها للمشاعر قضية الهجرة. يؤمن الكثيرون أن ازدهار أمتنا إنما يرجع إلى إسهامات المهاجرين واللاجئين الذين جاؤوا إلى هنا بحثا عن الحرية والفرص. ويؤمن الكثيرون إن أمتنا يحددها توافد أعداد أكبر من اللازم من الأجانب على بلادنا بصورة شرعية وغير شرعية. أي الفريقين على حق؟ وما هو العدد الصحيح من المهاجرين واللاجئين؟ ومتى يكون العدد أكبر من اللازم؟ هذا الأسبوع في برنامج داخل واشنطن سنناقش المناخ السياسية لقضية الهجرة مع أنا جيراتيلي وبيكي يونغ. Welcome back to Dakhel Washington. There is no more provocative and complex issue in American politics than immigration. We saw it in our legislative elections when it was a major issue that sprung up, and we see it every day at our southern border, where today American soldiers are patrolling on order of the president. I'm delighted to have Anna Giratelli and Becky Young with us to talk about immigration in America. So thank you. Let's first talk about the southern border. Why has President Trump ordered U.S. soldiers to the southern border, Anna?
So President Trump did this the first time in April when you had this caravan of about 1,000 Central American migrants making their way to the border. He did it with the National Guard. This time it was a little different. DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, asked the Pentagon to send active duty troops. So those are ones that are not just going to be there in the background. They are there in the background doing supportive roles, but they're not necessarily on the front lines, as we saw with the breach at the border in San Diego a couple weeks ago. There were no troops actually doing anything. But what they're doing is doing jobs in the back and allowing border forces to go to the front lines and do more law enforcement duties.
And is this, how much of this is politics? How much of this is national security? What is the mix here? What do you think?
You know, I think it's a little of both. Now, as military, you're not allowed to carry out law enforcement duties. That means troops can't arrest anybody who is caught illegally entering. They can't process initial credible fear requests from people. But certainly being deployed, it's a very sort of controversial thing. And President Trump has said, you know, if they are attacked, if someone throws rocks at troops, even though they're not necessarily on the front lines, they can respond with use of force. And that brings into a whole another set of issues, whether the federal government can sort of do as the president says in order to maintain national security, or if it's an overreach.
So, Becky, is this an emergency that you think exists on the southern border with the caravan moving north and the challenge to America's immigration control?
I think that there certainly is a concerning situation at the border, and what's really concerning is that the president has chosen to militarize the border. You asked whether it was political. I mean, a lot of these recent events were really timed coincidentally with our midterm elections, but also the recent asylum ban has been passed by the administration. So the administration has said that only people who enter legally at ports of entry may apply for asylum. And that is a violation of both U.S. law and also international law. And so I think that's created a very concerning situation.
So how does this end? What's the end game just on the narrow issue of this large group of people heading north and trying to enter the country? Will we forever now have American troops patrolling the southern border, or is this a moment that's going to pass?
Well, the Pentagon just extended the troop deployment so that they'll be there through the end of January if need be. That's an extra 6 weeks. Right now you have about 6,000 Central American migrants in Tijuana, which is a city of about 1.7 million just south of the San Diego border. You have 2,000 more migrants over 100 miles in a city called Mexicali. At this point, border officials are just trying to figure out, I think, what's their next move. Were they, one border official said they were sold a bill of bad goods. They thought they could just show up, apply for asylum, and be let into the country while their requests go through. He said some are starting to return to Central America. Others are waiting in line to apply for asylum. There's actually a paper going around between people as sort of the list of who gets to apply first. So they're sort of policing themselves and deciding who will go first. That way no one skips in line and jumps. But certainly you have thousands of people just sitting south of the border deciding what to do. And I think the U.S. is waiting, trying to make a deal with Mexico to see, is there a way we can better handle this in the future to avoid continual surges like this?
So, Becky, what do you think the answer is to solve this problem? And then we'll talk about the broader set of immigration challenges we have.
Right. I mean, I think that, first of all, are we going to have a situation at the southern border for the next 2 years? Probably yes, in some way, shape, or form. But this immediate group of individuals. So first of all, the asylum ban is being challenged in the courts. So there may be a court decision that would impact the individuals who are at the border who want to apply for asylum. I think some of them will be discouraged and return home. And I think the rest remains to be seen.
All right. So let's take a step back. This question, or the multitude of questions under the heading of immigration, have been at the top of the political agenda since the moment the president took office. And there's lots of different pieces to it. Let's take a look at some of these pieces. One of the first acts the president took was the so-called travel ban. So where are we today with all the legal challenges and the shifts in the travel ban and the different iterations of this ban? Where are we today in terms of the travel ban? Becky?
So there is a list of countries whose nationals still cannot travel to the United States. Iran is one that comes up a lot. There are individuals who may want to come visit their relatives. There's a dying relative on one side or the other, and those individuals cannot come to the U.S. They might have a job offer in the U.S. The travel ban, as you pointed out, has gone through several iterations. So the list of countries that were included has changed, and also the list of individuals who were banned has been narrowed because the original list was frankly illegal and unconstitutional. So the current travel ban is a more limited ban that applies to people from certain countries and is still being litigated in the courts.
So has the Supreme Court ruled on the fundamental idea that the president can impose this sort of ban? It's in the works right now. It's still working its way through the judicial system.
Yes.
And what about the politics of the ban? How has that evolved over the last 2 years?
I think the Trump administration has tried to say, specifically the State Department, that if, in a related issue, if you're not screening people leaving your country into the U.S., there's going to be consequences for that. And some of those consequences were we're not going to give visas to people trying to leave those countries to the U.S. Some of those countries said, okay, we'll enhance our security protocols, we'll screen them to the level that the U.S. wants, and then they received those being able to have their nationals apply for visas to come to the U.S. But the travel ban issue is, one of the many things the White House has had tangled up in the courts with DACA.
Right. We're gonna get to DACA, right? Yeah. Well, I want to ask you about something which got caught up in the travel ban, which people didn't focus on nearly as much, which is the refugee ban. I mean, there's a difference between travel ban and limitations on refugees. What is the status of that?
So for fiscal year 2019, the Trump administration has put a 30,000 cap on refugees. Now, those don't include people applying for asylum from, say, Central America. That's a separate process. But last year, in FY18, it was 45,000 refugees. And then you look at 2016 or 2017 under Obama, it was 110,000 cap. So certainly it's come down a lot. It used to be, I believe it was 100, 200,000 about 20 years ago. 9/11, it took a dive and it went back up. But President Trump has certainly tried to get that under control and really limit who's coming into the country. So it's not a ban, but it's an extreme
limitation.
So what are the implications of having such a low number of spots for refugees around the world?
Well, I mean, there's a global humanitarian crisis. There are 60 million displaced people worldwide. It's the biggest refugee crisis since World War II. And so when countries like the United States, which have traditionally been welcoming to refugees, close their doors, I think it creates immense human suffering. And it also, frankly, impacts us as a nation. Refugees have contributed a lot to our nation historically. So if we say no to those folks, I think we're doing ourselves a great disservice.
So just so our viewers understand, the 30,001st person, if they come from Rohingya fleeing genocide or a Uyghur fleeing ethnic cleansing, they can't get in. Is that it?
So, the way that the refugee process works is that it's completed overseas. So an asylee is someone who's in the U.S., a refugee is someone who's outside the U.S. So of the 60 million displaced people worldwide, only a very small percentage of them, I think it's less than 1%, will ever be repatriated to a third country. And the way that that process works is that you are selected by an agency, usually the UNHCR or an agency that's...
The UN High Commissioner for Refugees.
Yes, correct. And so a lot of times I hear people say, oh, well, these refugees should just go to the U.S. Embassy and apply for a visa to come to the U.S. That's not the way that the refugee selection process works. So individuals who are especially vulnerable, so children, women, LGBT people,
lesbian, gay people, those people may be selected by the refugee agencies, and then they go through a vetting process overseas to be sent to the United States.
But there's a hard limit of the number that can come into the United States.
Exactly.
All right, when we come back, I want to turn to a very hot potato, as we call it in the United States, a domestic political issue. You referred to DACA, a deferred action for childhood arrival, otherwise known as the Dreamers. We'll come back and talk about their status and other immigration issues in just a moment. Our panelists again today include Becky Young. Becky is an attorney who has practiced immigration law for more than 20 years, representing many of the world's most prominent hotels and restaurants. In addition, Becky provides immigration law advice to investment banking, securities, information technology, nonprofit, manufacturing, and healthcare companies. She's a partner of the law firm Grossman, Young, and Hammond. Sitting to her left is Anna Giratelli. Anna is a breaking news reporter for the Washington Examiner, a former press secretary for an immigration policy group on Capitol Hill. She has also reported for CQ Roll Call and Cox Media Group. Anna received her undergraduate degree from Asbury University in the bluegrass state of Kentucky. All right, let's turn to the Dreamers, the situation of young people whose parents brought them here. Parents came as undocumented illegal aliens, brought them here as young people who have grown up in America. What's their status under the Trump administration? Anna?
So in 2012, former President Barack Obama created DACA through executive order. What President Trump did in 2017 was say, I'm also going to use executive order to disband this program. So the issue now is whether Trump had the right to use executive order to disband it, whether Obama had the right to create it through executive order. It's very complicated, but it was disbanded last September. So it's been a year and 3 months now that this is still winding through the courts. And if your DACA, your permission to be in the program, it's every 2 years it expires, you can still reapply and get that work authorization and be safe from deportation.
So how many people are we talking about, approximately?
Actually, I don't know the numbers of DACA.
I believe it's about 600,000 to 700,000.
So 600,000 people, and they wonder every day when they turn on the news whether or not some court is going to determine.
Well,
whether
exactly,
they can stay
because
in the
their
country.
fate lies in the hands of this court at the moment. So, it could change at any time.
So that issue is in the courts as well.
That issue is there are a lot of issues in the courts.
So let me ask you about the question of family separation. This was a huge public issue a few months ago, where the administration was separating children from parents at the southern border. It went to court as well. What is the situation with this issue?
I mean, there are many children. I think the figure is somewhere between 10 and 15,000 who are still detained, and that's the current situation with family. And
have the families been reunited for the most part?
Many of the families have been reunited, but there are a certain number of families that the administration, or children, I guess, that the administration sort of lost track of their parents, and so there are nonprofits that are going to Latin America and trying to track down the parents of these children. The administration didn't have a really good record-keeping system for these humans that they had detained.
And what was the logic? Was it really a deterrent logic for why the administration pursued separation?
Yeah, earlier this year you started to see illegal immigration numbers every month starting to increase. So when Trump first took office, they were about 20,000 a month. They started to grow to 30, 40, and now 50 and 60,000 people per month. So what the administration tried to do was say, we've had this law where if you illegally enter the country, you should be referred for prosecution. Now what they've done is if I came over with my 5-year-old daughter, I would not be referred for prosecution because they can't separate me and my daughter. What the administration did was say, we're going to actually carry this law out and do what the law says. So they didn't create a new policy. They also didn't. It's been very obviously complicated.
So just before we break, we've gone through about half a dozen different discrete immigration issues in our conversation. Is there a next big immigration battle that we see on the horizon in 2019?
I mean, certainly in business immigration, we say that there's an invisible wall. So we hear a lot in the news about asylum seekers and people with DACA and sort of unskilled and low-skilled workers. But even for highly skilled workers, those people who would be allowed in under a sort of Canadian-style system, those people have been under attack. So, for example, you may have heard of the H-1B visa, which is for professional workers, highly skilled professional workers, and that category has been under attack, and I think we'll continue to see a lot of changes in that category in the next year. So I think that even for highly skilled workers, we can expect a big fight in 2019.
Okay, the battle over highly skilled workers. Anna, do you see another big immigration battle looming?
I think it's funny timing you ask, because yesterday Homeland Security put out new border apprehension numbers. You had more than 50,000 people apprehended between ports. The really interesting part of that is 25,000 of those were families. That's almost 4 times the number it was last November. It was about 7,000. And people are realizing, due to certain court rulings in the past and U.S. laws, if you come with a family, your chances of avoiding deportation, coming from a family from a non-Mexico, non-Canada, from a country that's not bordering the U.S., it's going to be a lot easier to avoid deportation and then apply for asylum.
Better to come with your children.
Oh, certainly. And I think the way the Trump administration tries to handle that with changing asylum policy, they're working with the new Mexican administration to see if you go through Mexico, do you have to stay in Mexico before you can apply for asylum in the U.S.? Different things like that. I'm interested to see how that's going to pan out, because that could really affect the levels of illegal immigration and even asylum in the future.
Excellent. Two things to look out for: problems with highly skilled workers and the exploding number of families coming across the border. Thank you both, Becky and Anna, for joining us today for this vitally important but very complex issue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think what is largely unknown is that there are 435 disparate voices, 100 in the Senate, and 5 people who are delegates, like from Puerto Rico, all who have their own opinions. It is a marketplace of ideas. You don't wave a wand and say, we're going to just do this or do that. And I think that's a good thing. We have a lot of diversity here, which is our strength. The more diversified I think we are, the better, because we have a myriad of ideas and inputs.
Of all my possessions, none is more precious to me than this piece of yellow paper, 95 years old. When my father was just 2 years old, this document, officially called A Declaration of Alien About to Depart for the United States, was his ticket to freedom. He, his older brother, and his parents were smuggled across borders from their tiny village in Soviet-controlled Ukraine all across Europe, where they eventually sailed across the Atlantic in the steamship Mauritania, docking in New York in late 1923. To me, this paper symbolizes everything that is good about America, a country that welcomed poor, penniless immigrants who didn't know a word of English and gave them a chance. Though my grandparents never did learn to speak English, my father and his brother paid back their new country with military service in World War II, and between them, 180 years of solid, hard-working, tax-paying citizenship, each living to about 90 years old. Today, those poor, penniless immigrants who never learned English have produced a family of doctors, dentists, engineers, teachers, businessmen, and me, a historian and a scholar. We're as American as descendants of pilgrims from the Mayflower. Now, I understand the fears and worries of Americans who feel threatened by unchecked immigration. In some parts of our country, some Americans are shaken by the perception that strange people with strange languages, strange customs, strange beliefs, and strange cultures seem to be everywhere. We're a country of rules, and rules should apply to immigration too. Illegal immigration should be thwarted and prevented, not extolled and overlooked. Without rules that are enforced, they may very well be a flood of immigrants that overwhelm schools, hospitals, and social welfare institutions. After all, in countries around the world, you don't see long lines of people queuing up for visas to Russia or China. You see them in front of the American embassy. But the solution is not to shut our doors and turn our back on the world. Enforce our laws, yes, but the America I know and I love is a welcoming country, willing to extend its hand and find room in its great, vast open spaces for innocents fleeing fear, hunger, disease, and death. Tightening borders against illegal immigration is one thing. Ending all entry for refugees is something very different. The America I know and love would never turn its back on a Rohingya fleeing genocide, on a Uyghur escaping ethnic cleansing, on a Venezuelan seeking freedom from an ugly and brutal dictatorship. To include those victims on lists of people banned from our country in an effort to prevent terrorists from sneaking in undermines the very essence of who we are. Now, this is an issue on which reasonable people should be able to find reasonable solutions. So far, that solution has eluded our elected leaders, men and women of both parties. As a child of an immigrant, I hope we can find a compromise that lets us regain that special quality that made my grandparents want to risk their lives to come here. بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول نقاشنا الوطني الكبير حول الهجرة، أرجو أن تتواصلوا معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاغ InsideWashington أو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على @RobSatloff. سأراكم الأسبوع المقبل، وإلى أن ألقاكم شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.